Welcome to the Up for the Challenge podcast. I am your host, Reverend Joshua C. Robertson, and today we have an excellent episode to present to you all. But before I go further, I want to remind everyone to check out our very first episode featuring none other than Dr. Cornel West. I sat with this global scholar on the podcast, and he talked about his vision for education, which includes being honest about the difference between education and schooling. You can catch that episode and all of our episodes on our YouTube channel or other platforms where podcasts are available. Just search Up for the Challenge podcast or Black Pastors United for Education. Now, you are all in for a great treat. Today's guest is Dr. Irvin Scott. Dr. Scott teaches at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. Before coming to Harvard, Dr. Scott served as the Deputy Director for K-12 Education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he led the investment of $300 million in initiatives focused on transforming how teachers are recruited, developed, and rewarded. Prior to his foundation work, Dr. Scott spent over 20 years working as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and chief academic officer. Right before going to the foundation, Dr. Scott was the chief academic officer for Boston Public Schools, where he was responsible for the academic programming of the school systems, as well as overseeing all regional superintendents and schools in the district. As principal, Dr. Scott led a team of teachers and administrators to reform the 3,200 student high school into 8 small learning communities, as well as to develop core curricula for all students. Dr. Scott began his professional education experience in the classroom as an English teacher and choral director for 15 years. He holds a bachelor's degree from Millersville University, a master's degree in education from Temple University, and a master's and doctoral degree from Harvard University. He is also the author of the book Leading with Heart and Soul, 30 Inspiring Lessons of Faith, Learning, and Leadership for Educators. Welcome, Dr. Scott, and thank you for being here today with us.
Joshua, I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited about this opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an honor and it's a privilege for us to have you here. I believe that the conversation at hand as it relates to education in America is a tough conversation, but I believe we are up for the challenge.
I appreciate the opportunity. Let me also say it is an honor to follow Dr. Cornel West,
Wow.
Who is a trailblazer around education, around faith, around religion, around society. And so I'm honored to be here following him.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's jump in. Can you tell us a little bit about your life, your background, and maybe a little bit about your career in education, how you got to a career in education?
Yeah, I think there are several things that sort of are at the foundation of that question. One is my faith experience, my religious, spiritual experience, because I was born in the church. My father is a pastor, my mother deep partners in the Church of God in Christ, denomination that you're very familiar with.
Absolutely. That's home for me.
That's home for me. And so I grew up in the church, grew up in that tradition, and is always a part of me. And so much so that I thought one day, and many people thought one day, I would be a pastor. Wow. I would be a preacher. I would be a bishop. People have a way of speaking over your life. And so they spoke over my life that way. And in some ways, I thought that's what I was going to be. But then I fell in love with the other part of my identity, which is the one that I'm continuing to do work in, and that's education. I fell in love with literature. I fell in love with writing. I fell in love with English. And so I went on, become a teacher, and then eventually a nonprofit director and a principal and a district leader. And really what became interestingly important for me to understand was that while I wasn't the traditional minister or preacher or pastor the way people had envisioned, I, in many ways, was doing that pastoral work, but through public schools.
Yes.
And through teaching, through being a principal.
Marketplace evangelism.
I love that. Yeah. Yes, marketplace evangelism. And so that's been the essence of my career. And so one of the things that's always been important to me was not only to do that work in powerful ways, but do it in deep and powerful ways, but to do it at scale also.
Sure.
So I was always interested in touching as many lives as I possibly could. And that's what drove me to get more degrees.
Sure.
So I wanted to get my master's and take on more leadership roles and eventually get my doctorate, take on more leadership roles, to the point that I ended up at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I'm honored to be in, honored to do that work at a national level, and now working at Harvard University, training future leaders. So that's sort of the trajectory, but make no mistake about it, it all started with, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
Yes.
What's up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. Like Dr. Corner West says, your roots determine your routes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like the roots in the church, I think that plays such a critical role to one's trajectory. I look at, myself and I say, I grew up in the church same way. Pastor, son of a pastor.
Yep.
And, I never thought that I would be pastoring now. Never in a million years. In fact, when I told my parents that I felt called to the ministry, my mom said, well, you sure you saved?
Sounds just like a mother in the church.
She said, let's wait and see. Hold on.
Oh,
We got
I
to make
love
sure
that.
you're good and saved first.
Right.
But, and I feel the same way, right? Like that God has, yes, called me to be a pastor of a church, of a local congregation, but I'm a pastor, comma, not period.
I love that.
And so that's why, for me, education as a pastor is a passion of mine as well. And so you have extensive experience in public schools and charter.
Yeah.
But you're an ally of school choice.
Yes.
How does that happen when we live in a world that very much so, if you are public school, you can't be an ally of school choice. And if you're for school choice, you can't be for public schools.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you're able to walk in, the tension of the two.
Yeah. So to me, there isn't any tension. It boils down to being an ally of great schools for individual students, right?
Wow.
I am an ally of great schools for individual students. I'll just say this real quick from a personal standpoint. I have 3 sons, Irvin, Leon, and Nicholas. My wife and I, Keisha, we have 3 sons, Irvin, Leon, and Nicholas. Over the years of us raising those 3 wonderful African-American males, we have noticed that they need different things at different times in their education journey.
Sure.
So they've been in public schools, they've been in private elite schools, they've been in faith-based schools. At some point in time in their sort of 12-year trajectory of education, we have had to put them in different education settings based on their individual needs. Here's the thing about it. My wife and I, we had the financial wherewithal to do that. Not every family has the financial wherewithal to do what we were able to do. Sure. And so in some ways they get locked into one type of school. And I believe there are great schools out there, and hopefully the schools will be able to cater to their individual needs. But I am a fan of choice, ultimately so that students can have the best education experience. I'm also a fan of making sure that the schools where most of the kids will go, there are 50 million kids in this country.
Yes.
Most of the schools most of the kids are going to have to go to public schools. And so the traditional public schools, because charter schools are also public schools, they are just a different type of public school.
No one likes to say that, though.
That's very true, though. Charter schools are public schools. I'm in education. I've been in education for 30-some years. Charter schools are public schools. They are a different type of public school, but they're still public schools. I am a fan of making sure that all kids have an opportunity to have great schools. What I don't want to do, and what I think we should be cautious about, is robbing from schools where most of the kids go so that we can support another set of schools where very few number of kids go. So I think we have to be really thoughtful and strategic about making sure that where most of the kids are going to be, we continue to support those schools in robust and equitable ways. Let me just put it that way.
Well, I think here's the piece that I have with school choice as it relates to what you just said. For instance, in Pennsylvania, you have Lifeline scholarships, right?
Yeah.
3 years ago, Lifeline Scholarships, a $100 million scholarship program, was funded through property taxes. 3 years ago, I could not be a proponent for Lifeline Scholarships because our local public school, which houses and educates the majority of our students, that's their line item, right?
It would be taken
from, and our local public schools already feel under-resourced. So I'm not gonna, as much as I would love a scholarship program to help the bottom 15%, it's already a depleted account, right? But recently, that account, they found a different pocket of money. Our legislators
that wouldn't take from the traditional
public school, yes, which is our state income tax, right? And still, even now that they found a completely different pot of money that would not, injure our public schools, we find our lawmakers still fighting against these scholarship programs that could help the least of these. And this is the reason why I believe, as a constituency, as a congregation of people, as voters and people who are American citizens, we should stop looking to politicians to make decisions for us and start being educated as to these issues and then expecting them to fulfill our wishes. We can have a both and in our country. Why do you think the both and approach is met with so much resistance from lawmakers and the people who lead us?
I think, first of all, regarding that particular policy or that particular source of funding, I have to get more educated about it, right?
And I was using it anecdotally.
I understand. I mean, from an education standpoint, I think, first of all, there are so many so much division that is driven by politics that people end up lining up on opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm in this camp and this person's in this camp, and very few of us, I'll put myself in that category, spend time trying to understand each other's perspective. And so when you say both and, people aren't talking that way. They think it's either or. And unfortunately, that gives us what we have now, where we have a very divisive country, we have a divisive state, we have a very divisive executive branch that I think that states things not in a way that's around let's have a conversation, but my way or the highway. I don't think that's healthy for a democracy. I don't think that's healthy for education, for different parts of what the government is supposed to be doing. And so I think that's the world that we're currently living in, and it does have implications for education, and I don't think it's healthy for kids. And so I feel like we have to figure out how to get back, at least from an education standpoint, to this question of how do we ensure great education opportunities for all children, and that might mean that there are different options for children. And I am a fan of that. Now, not everybody who's in my world is a fan of different options, but I think all are fans of making sure that children have great education opportunities. It's the how we do it that becomes oftentimes difficult.
Exactly. I think that's with everything. That's a principle of life. It's not so much what you're doing, but it is how you're doing. Like the process does have to make sense with the end and thought.
Absolutely.
I want to give you some statistics. Here's some statistics from the recent NAEP studies, the National Assessment of Education
Progress.
Yes. And here's what it says. Only 31% of students in 4th grade and 30% of students in 8th grade are reading proficiently, which is a 2% and 1% drop respectively from 2022. Scores in reading and have dropped 10 points since 2019. Numerous studies show that reading on grade level by 3rd grade is inextricably linked to students' future success. I want to give you a quote from Jeannie Allen, who is the CER founder and CEO, Center for Education Reform. This is what she says. The data shows that the majority of the nation's school systems have failed to master effective reading instruction, ignoring not only how it should be taught, proven science, but also the importance of engaging students with rich content and literature that stimulates the mind and ensures that vocabulary and comprehension increases. In light of the crisis that we are in nationally as it relates to reading and math, what are some things you think, at a grassroots level can be done to change the trajectory of, the current reading and math scores that exist among our youth?
3 things. One is one of my biggest concerns right now around, and I know this is not a political conversation, but one of my biggest concerns about the way the current administration is moving is the reason why you were able to read that quote is because the National Assessment for Educational Progress is an assessment that the nation has to determine how our kids are doing. The current administration is moving forward with moving a lot of the infrastructure that allows us to do NAEP. And so if we go on the current path that the administration is on, we won't be able to have NAEP scores to determine how our kids are performing. So I would say one strategy is let's continue to assess how our kids are performing, and let's break it out demographically so that we can disaggregate the data, see how Black kids are doing, Latino kids doing, it's white kids are doing, poor kids. That is important for us to continue to do in order for us to figure out how we're going to address it.
Sure.
So I think the first step is let's continue to do NAEP. The second thing is I feel like we should figure out how to, this is my personal, I talk a little bit about this in here, how to engage more with the communities that support our kids beyond the schools. Schools can't do everything. We do have to support schools to ensure that they do what they are required to do: great curriculum, great teaching, great learning, great leadership, great supports during the school day. But kids are in schools 180 days. There are 360 days in the year.
Sure.
How do we partner more intentionally with faith-based organizations, with government organizations, with community-based organizations to ensure that kids are supported and have the services beyond the school day to ensure that they are also succeeding? Another thing I would say is and this is sort of connected with the second point, one of the reasons why kids are struggling is because we have not recovered from COVID, right? And so COVID took a huge hit on kids because they weren't in schools, and while online was better than nothing, it was nowhere near what most of our kids needed,
Sure.
which was to be in schools. And so this is another argument for providing the supports that students need. The infusion of dollars that came during the Biden administration, which were the ESSER dollars, those dollars have dried up. But the evidence suggests that infusion of dollars did actually pay off in accelerating student growth in response to COVID. And so in summary, I would say let's continue to make sure that we have the infrastructure. We should not get rid of the Department of Education, and we should not stop testing nationally to see how our kids are doing. So continue NAEP. Let's reach beyond the school day and partner more intentionally with faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and others. And also let's make sure that we don't stop investing in our children, our communities, especially the ones that are more marginalized or struggling in response to COVID and other things like that.
Sure. Do you think that we could leverage our own taxpayer dollars to do what you're saying, right? And not just for our public schools, but for instance, like if we do partner, faith-based community, right? The government, issued, opportunities for education or community, whatever those things are. Can we leverage our taxpayer dollars so that accessibility to those programs are not reduced to affordability? The reason why I think that way, I pastor a church, right? I think about, a mother who comes to me now whose oldest child, she has 4 kids, right? The oldest child is doing well in the public school. The middle child has a bent towards aviation and wants to learn about, pilots and those things. And then the 2 younger are twins, but they're on the spectrum of autism and need special care. But she live in the middle of the hood, right? She live in a tough neighborhood. She's fighting for her life. In our current system, really the only resources for her 4 children are the local public schools, right? And so if a local church wants to come alongside and help this single mother with her 2 autistic kids or whatever that may be across that, how can we make it where these programs are not reduced to affordability? Because in the neighborhood that I serve, the equity in the community is not finance, but it's the genius that's locked in those kids and those people. I think faith-based organizations, religious organizations, are untapped resources that we should find ways to leverage more intentionally, more deliberately, to support communities. Yes. I agree 100%. And without injuring the public schools.
Without injuring the public schools. I think that's a social they have social capital that schools don't have because the communities know them, the families know them, they are there. When the schools are closed, the church is still open. On the weekends, schools are closed, churches. I think, yes, absolutely, for academic issues, for social, emotional issues, even for health issues where you have health centers inside of churches or whatever the case may be. I agree with all that. Your question, I think the fundamental, what makes your question a little more challenging is you said, should we use taxpayer money to do that? And I think that's where the rub, that's where the complexity is. That's where the rub is. And so I think we should be very thoughtful about how we're doing this. We shouldn't just rush in, because here's where I think we can overstep the boundary and hurt everybody. If I take my taxpayer money and I give it to that particular faith-based program, and that faith-based program is trying to save that child, save them spiritually, in our language, as opposed to trying to help them with math, trying to help them with reading, trying to help them in other ways, then I think that goes too far, because our country is built on this notion of the separation of church and state, and we don't use taxpayer money to have altar calls. I think that is a good thing for this country. Because if we're going to use taxpayer money to have altar calls, then we have to use taxpayer money to have people also believe in Islam. And we have to use taxpayer money to have them believe in another faith. And so as long as the money is not used for proselytize or the promotion of a particular faith, which you have to really pay attention to and audit and ensure that it's not happening, then I think it's okay. I think most taxpayers believe that that's probably going to be too hard for certain faith-based organizations to do. They won't be able to draw the fine line from helping them with math and laying hands on them and saying, you need to be delivered. I don't want my taxpayer money going to an organization to say you need to be delivered, because that's not what we're here to do when it comes to taxpayer money. I hope that I'm making that clear.
No, absolutely. I think my only rebuttal to that is the classic rebuttal, right? It's what you're going to get from everybody. At the same time, I don't want my taxpayer dollar introducing my child to, sexuality or gender, or I don't want I have girls. I do not want a little boy in my little girl's locker room, nor do I want the ideology behind that. The reason why I wholeheartedly believe in school choice is because I do believe in the dignity of people who do believe that. Like, even God is a God of choice. He's a God of absolutely standard. And he has his way that he wants us to live, but he doesn't force it upon us. And so, with that in our public schools now, right, I think about parents who feel like their kids are trapped in these schools because they don't agree with those ideologies, right? But they're forced upon them.
Yeah.
And so it's people who I get the counter argument is we don't want religious schools in there, hook 'em a sign over the kids speaking in tongues, y'all. Sorry.
He's speaking in tongues, y'all.
we don't want the parent.
We're using Pentecostal examples, just to be clear.
Yes, that's what we are doing. Yeah. We don't want them doing that and laying hands in the middle of the class, in the middle of math, as opposed to doing the right work there. But I think it's both, right? Yeah. So I think it's holding our schools accountable for what we are okay with and what we're not okay with, which I think is a further argument for choice, right? Being able to rightly, appropriately leverage our taxpayer dollars to accomplish all of this.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point. And this is the conversation that you and I are having, because we are together on 85% of what we're talking about, and we have this little tension with the 15%, if I'm doing my math right. But people don't want to have that kind of conversation, and that's unfortunate. And what's happening as a result of that 15% that we're not necessarily seeing eye to eye on is someone else is coming in and making us and dividing us even more, and the ones that are being hurt are our kids, our communities. And so I agree with you. I agree. I think if a family or you feel like your kids are in an experience where they're being told to believe something that you disagree with as a parent, that is not good. That's not good for you as a family, as a parent, and you should have opportunities to do things like pull them out, homeschool. But you might say, well, if I pull them out, I don't want that. I want them to be educated beyond just me at home, because I don't have that capacity.
Exactly.
And I think what you're also saying is, I would like to use some of the taxpayer money to do that education.
That I worked hard for, right? Who does the taxpayer dollar belong to?
Right. And so I'm trying to play back your argument.
Sure.
And I see that argument. The one thing that I would say is, I think sometimes, first of all, you have a voice. You should be able to go to the school board and say, this is happening in my classroom. I don't agree with it. Can you please explain to me why this is happening in my classroom, why a teacher said this, why the administration is saying this, why, because I don't agree with those policies. And because we have local control, and the school board should be able to respond. They could say, we didn't know that was happening. They could say, we're going to talk to the principal. They could say, this is a policy, in which case we're going to continue to do it. And you could then make a choice around what you're going to do going forward. But the other thing I would say is, last thing I'll say is, oftentimes I think what my experience is, because we are in public school settings, we have to ensure that every child that walks through that door feels protected, respected, safe, and so forth and so on. And so if a child walks through that door and they look different from me, what I believe as the principal, what I believe as the teacher, it doesn't matter. They walk through that door, and I have a statute that talks about public schools that says I have to respect them and I have to protect them. I have to make sure they feel like they can do anything they want to do when it comes to the academics, and they can be whoever they want to be. And so what public schools then get painted sort of with a wide brush is that we are celebrating, or we are promoting, or we are saying this is the way you should be, when all we're doing is we're saying,
creating safe space.
Whoever you are, we're going to make sure that this is a place for you. And then, of course, laws then say that we got to do certain things about that, whether it's bathrooms or whatever the case may be. And then that's where people start to feel like, wait a minute, you're not just creating safe spaces, you're promoting it. Well, I'm making sure that kid feels like he can come into this school
Yes.
and read and feel safe and won't be attacked.
Yes.
As a principal, growing up in the Church of God in Christ,
Mm-hmm.
you better believe I understood that was one of my responsibilities, no matter how I believed, because I was in a public school. Okay, that's a long answer. I hope that's
No,
okay,
I
Josh.
mean, I think you're saying exactly what needs to be said, right? Is like the public schools are responsible. They're the catch-all.
Every
right?
child in this
Exactly,
country.
because
Yes. Including immigrant children.
Exactly, right? So you have a child who moves here from another country, the parents are illiterate, the kid doesn't know English, and guess what? They still have to take the test,
They
the
still have to
standardized
take the-
test at the
that's
end of the
very
year,
true,
and the
Josh.
public school has to care for them. And this is the reason why I wholeheartedly am a fighter for school choice, responsible school choice,
Yeah.
meaning that doesn't end our public schools because of that responsibility.
great point.
Right? But at the same time, there has to be options because our public schools are underperforming significantly. And it's not an issue of just black people, it's white people, it's Hispanic people, it's black people, it's people, period. Our public schools are in crisis. And I wholeheartedly believe if we would actually be American, the creatives that we are, the innovators that we are, the collaborators that we are, that we could cure this problem. But I think it takes conversations like these
I agree with
that
you.
we agree 85 to 90% on what's going on. It's the small percentage that we allow to divide us instead of distinguish us.
That's a very good point. Well said.
Jeff Coleman asked me to ask you this question about the convergence of your faith and the academy. When people think of Ivy League and the academy, some think that they are beyond the faith or intellectually beyond the faith. In what ways have you been able to witness or share your faith in a post-biblical or secular academic world?
So one of the ways that I witness and share my faith is through the class, faith, education, and leadership. But it's not just my faith. I allow students who come into the class to share their faith perspectives. I'm a Christian. Students come into the class who are Muslim, who are Islamic, who are Jewish, who are Baha'i, so many Buddhists. And so I'm interested in giving not only myself an opportunity to share my faith, but others an opportunity to share my faith. The other way that I do it is through this book, Faith, Leading with Heart and Soul, 30 Inspiring Lessons of Faith, Learning, and Leadership for Educators. And so the ways that I do it is by creating spaces, whether it be through classes, talking very explicitly about how I think about faith as it relates to my work, and then writing about it and doing podcasts like this one, which I'm honored to be on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this time that we share.
It's a joy having
Absolutely.
this opportunity.
Absolutely.
Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the Up for the Challenge podcast with Dr. Scott here. We enjoyed our time together. Of course, we want you to subscribe, to like, to share this podcast. You can find it on all major streaming platforms, including our YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you in the future. I believe we are up for the challenge, and I think we can do it better if we do it together. Thank you.
Let's go.